The crystal wineglass shattered against the marble, like a tiny bell struck too hard, and the room went silent. A few diners flinched. Most pretended they hadn't heard. Only the young woman in the white apron, Jessica, cheeks blotched and eyes wet, stood there frozen by humiliation. She had brought the bottle with careful hands, the way the head sommelier had taught her, and still it hadn't been good enough. "Get out of my sight," said the man at table 7, without lifting his gaze from his phone. He didn't need to raise his voice. Authority traveled on the cool current of his consonants. Ethan Cross was a 32-year-old white American with a fortune built on steel, glass, and land. People said his money could buy anything. The people who worked at Lumière knew better. What he bought here was control. Jessica swallowed, unknotted the apron from her waist, and laid it on the floor as if it might break too. She didn't look at anyone on her way to the staff door. A dozen practiced eyes avoided hers. When the door swung shut behind her, the dining room din resumed at once, as if a conductor had cut his baton through the air. From the pass, the sous chef Carlos muttered, "That's 3 in 2 weeks." Janet, a senior server with a posture that could balance a tray in a hurricane, answered under her breath, "He doesn't yell. Somehow that's worse." At table 7, the corner seat with a view of the river north glow, Ethan scrolled. He wore slate, not black, a watch that hid its extravagance, a face that gave nothing away. He came to Lumière every Tuesday and Friday, sat alone and peeled away the composure of whatever server had drawn the short straw. He did not throw tantrums. He did not insult loudly. He made the impossible feel inevitable. Pierre Dubos, the manager, crossed the floor with the calm of a man who had memorized a dozen apologies and their proper order. "Mr. Cross," he said, batting no eyelash at the shards glinting at his guest's shoes. "I am so sorry for the disruption. Allow me to—" "Not a disruption," Ethan said. "A correction." He finally looked up. His eyes were pale and unreadable, like the sky before a winter storm. "Please send someone competent." Pierre swallowed. "Of course." Ethan dropped his gaze to the phone again, and the manager retreated, heat prickling at his collar. Lumière was booked 3 months out. Famous athletes came after home games. Politicians came after victories. Families came to mark the kind of nights they took pictures of. And still on these evenings, the staff counted down minutes around table 7. Ethan never left less than 15%. He never asked for anything off menu. He never raised his voice. He was by every technical measure a model customer. The problem was not what he asked for. The problem was what it cost to serve him. In the break room, Pierre leaned against the steel counter and pressed his palms to his eyes. "Anyone," he said to the cluster of uniforms pretending not to stare. "We need a cover for 7. Tonight." No one volunteered. Carlos wiped his hands on a towel and said, "We've got a new hire, don't we?" Janet said. "Not for him." Pierre exhaled slowly. "Her paperwork is done. Her uniform fits, and unless I plan to wait tables myself." He didn't finish. He didn't have to. The last time he'd taken the section, Ethan had looked at him as if he were a substitute math teacher and said, "I pay for service, not management theater." On the floor, the orchestra of service struck up its next movement, murmurs clinking cutlery, the low blue of jazz beneath conversation. Ethan watched none of it. He skimmed an email, fired off a response he could have written in his sleep, and glanced at the room's tall windows, where the city was a smear of lights. He didn't remember the last time he had enjoyed a meal. Enjoyment required the absence of vigilance. Vigilance had built everything he owned. A server drifted too close, then changed course. Another glanced at the shards beneath his chair and thought better of offering to sweep them. Ethan noted both movements without appearing to. He noticed most things. People thought money taught you to expect more. It taught you to expect less of sincerity, competence, and of anyone's motives. It taught you to build a world where no one could disappoint you because you never gave them the chance. Pierre said when the manager returned, he had a call at 9. You can manage a steak and a glass of wine before then. Yes, sir, Pierre said, though his mouth had gone dry. We'll have someone with you in a moment. In the kitchen corridor, Janet caught his sleeve. You really want to send the new girl out there? Pierre's smile was tight. I really don't want to lose another veteran tonight. She's strong. She'll be fine. He wasn't sure he believed himself. He knocked once on the open door of the tiny office that doubled as a locker room. A young woman stood at the mirror, tying an apron with careful fingers, checking that the name tag sat straight. She had the nervous energy of first shifts and a posture that said she took pride in getting small things right. Naomi, Pierre said, softening his voice. How are you feeling? She turned. Ready, she said, and smiled. She was Naomi Carter, a 24-year-old Black American woman who had moved to Chicago a month earlier. Her eyes were steady. Everything else looked brand new. We're putting you on a regular, Pierre said. He's particular. Stay professional. Get the details right. If there's a problem, bring me in. Particularly, I can do, Naomi said. At my coffee shop job, the grinder sounds like a lawnmower. No one can hear anyone. We still manage to get oat milk to those who will riot without it. Janet huffed a laugh despite herself. She said you don't have to prove anything to him softer than she meant to. Don't take it personally. Naomi nodded. Thanks. Back on the floor, Ethan watched a couple at the window raise their glasses, his mind already drifting to a spreadsheet he preferred to people. The room was beautiful. The people were lovely. Beauty had never saved anything worth saving. Carlos sent out a runner with a broom to clear the broken glass. Ethan shifted his chair an inch to accommodate said nothing and returned to the screen. He had learned to make space for cleanup. He noticed Pierre moving with purpose. He saw the new server at the manager's shoulder, the quiet confidence in her gait, the fresh press of her uniform, the name engraved on the tin rectangle above her heart. Naomi. He noticed, too, an echo of something he hadn't felt since his teens, the small, unexpected awareness that another person had entered a room. He set the phone face down. Across the dining room, Naomi inhaled once steady and deep, and stepped through the invisible cold ring around the corner table. The light caught the edge of the river. Somewhere a piano changed keys. She could feel Janet's eyes on her back, hear the kitchen slow for a heartbeat as shoe soles held on tile. She did not speed up, and she did not stall. She stopped at the exact distance that said, I am here to serve you, and I am not here to be destroyed. Mr. Cross. Pierre began. This is... Ethan lifted a hand, the smallest gesture, and the manager fell silent. For the first time that evening, Ethan met another pair of eyes. He had expected fear. He found calm. Good evening, Naomi said. I'm Naomi Carter. I'll be taking care of you. Ethan studied her face, the professional warmth that was not obsequious, the steadiness that was not defiance. He didn't smile. He rarely did. But something like interest flickered and went still. We'll see, he said. While watching from the service station, Janet whispered to no one in particular. God help her. The room breathed, the night resumed its hum, and Table 7, Lumière's smallest stage and sharpest test, waited for the first line of a scene that would change every person who played a part in it. Outside, the river slid on. Inside, a billionaire adjusted his cuffs. A new server squared her shoulders, and the fragile piece of a perfectly set dining room rested on the narrow bridge between them. Naomi Carter had never been inside a place like Lumière before the day she saw the Help Wanted sign taped neatly in the corner of its gilded glass door. From the outside, it looked more like an art gallery than a restaurant. Tall windows, warm golden lighting spilling onto the sidewalk, and tables that glimmered under crystal chandeliers. When she'd stepped inside for the interview, the first thing she noticed wasn't the polished marble or the whispering classical music. It was the smell butter garlic wine herbs so fresh they smelled like they'd been picked from the earth only moments before. She hadn't planned to end up here. Chicago had been a last-minute decision born of necessity. After her grandmother's passing, Atlanta had felt unbearably empty. The jobs she cobbled together there barely paid the rent, and without the familiar presence of the woman who had raised her every street corner, felt like a memory she didn't want to replay. When her savings began to thin, she made a choice. She packed her belongings into 2 suitcases, bought a bus ticket north, and told herself she'd find work any work until she saved enough to start nursing school. She had expected to land in another coffee shop or a fast food chain. Instead, she stumbled across Lumière, and Pierre, desperate for staff, hired her on the spot. "Your smile," he had said with his charming but nervous French accent. "It will reassure our guests. And your posture very professional. You will do well." Naomi hadn't mentioned she had never balanced more than 3 plates at a time, or that her knowledge of wine extended to whatever was cheapest at the grocery store. She only nodded, thanked him, and promised she learned fast. A week later, she was standing in the employee hallway, adjusting her apron, trying not to let the fear in her stomach climb into her throat. Janet had given her a look of both pity and warning before whispering, "You sure you're ready for him?" Naomi didn't ask who he was. The answer came soon enough. When Pierre led her toward the infamous corner table, the kitchen staff fell into the usual silence for funerals. Carlos muttered something about lighting candles for her soul. Naomi caught it and smiled faintly, refusing to let nerves show. She had dealt with difficult people before. Truckers slamming coffee cups, construction workers grumbling at diners back home. Once during a late shift at the Waffle House, she had diffused a fight between 2 men twice her size by refusing to back down. She wasn't naive. People got ugly when they were hungry, tired, or entitled. But she had also learned something important. Most people just wanted to feel heard. "Listen," her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind. "You listen before you speak. You stand tall, even when you feel small, and don't let anyone trick you into forgetting your worth." She carried that rhythm in her chest as she approached table 7. Ethan Cross studied her the way a collector studies an artifact. Not out of admiration, not yet, but evaluation. Her uniform was crisp, her shoes shone. She didn't fidget or fold in on herself like the others did when they approached him. She introduced herself with calm confidence, which he noted was unusual. "Your usual," Sir Pierre prompted, with a too bright tone. Ethan let silence stretch until the manager looked ready to faint. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he dismissed Pierre entirely and fixed Naomi with his pale gaze. "You don't know it, do you?" he asked. Naomi tilted her head. "Your usual order?" "Not yet. But I'd be happy if you told me. I'll make sure to remember it." It wasn't the answer he expected. Most servers stammered apologies, tripped over themselves to blame management, or scrambled for help. This one stood pen poised over her pad, as if this were no different from any other table. For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. The corner of his mouth twitched, nearly a smile, though not quite. He recited his order slowly, deliberately, as if daring her to forget a single detail. She repeated it back to him word for word. Her tone was steady. Not submissive, not arrogant. Professional. "Fine," Ethan said at last. He leaned back in his chair, expression unreadable, and returned to his phone. Pierre exhaled behind her like a man escaping death row. Naomi only nodded politely, scribbled the final notes, and excused herself to the kitchen. The staff swarmed her as soon as she stepped behind the swinging doors. Carlos, arms folded, asked, "So did he bite your head off yet?" "He ordered dinner," Naomi replied, shrugging. "I wrote it down." Janet frowned. That's all. Naomi slid the order ticket across the counter to the chefs. Medium rare steak peppercorn sauce on the side, steamed asparagus firm baked potato plain, 2018 Cabernet Sauvignon. "He wants to see the bottle before you open it." Carlos whistled. "Did you get all that on the first try?" "That's my job." The kitchen exchanged looks, some skeptical, some impressed. Janet gave her a long, searching glance, then shook her head. "Girl, you really don't know what you're up against." "Maybe not." But Naomi had a philosophy: if you expected the worst, you'd see the worst. If you expected better, sometimes people surprised you. At the table, Ethan scrolled through business updates, mergers, pending numbers that climbed and dipped like a tide. He didn't think about the waitress, except for the faint memory of her composure. It wasn't fearlessness exactly, more like self-possession. As if she belonged here, even though he knew she didn't. When she returned with his wine, presenting the bottle label first, he caught himself glancing up, studying her expression for signs of nerves. There weren't any. She poured carefully, stepped back, and waited. "Try it," she said politely. He raised the glass, sniffed, swirled, tasted. His first instinct was to find a flaw. He always did. The wine, however, was exactly as it should be. "It's fine," he said flatly. She smiled, as though he had given her the highest compliment. "I'll put in your entree now." And then she left him alone. No groveling, no trembling, no apology for being new. Just service, clean and professional. Janet was waiting for Naomi to return to the break room for a glass of water. "You should be careful," the older server said quietly. "He likes to find people's breaking point. He'll push until you snap. That's why no one lasts with him." Naomi met her eyes evenly. Then, "No one's handled him the right way yet." "You think you'll be different?" "Everyone has a reason for the way they act. Some people need patience." Janet sighed. "Patience doesn't pay the rent." Naomi didn't argue. She only tightened the knot of her apron, finished her water, and walked back onto the floor. Out by the windows, Ethan watched her cross the dining room with that same steady stride. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't expected at Lumière: curiosity. The following Tuesday evening, Lumière buzzed with its usual quiet elegance. Crystal glasses chimed softly, candles flickered against polished silver, and a low quartet drifted through the speakers. The restaurant was a sanctuary of wealth and indulgence, where the city's elite came to prove taste and status. And in the far corner, seated at the infamous Table 7, Ethan Cross tapped his watch once before setting it deliberately on the tablecloth. He had arrived early, as he always did. It wasn't the food that brought him here. It was routine control. The certainty that in a world forever shifting beneath his feet, this table would be waiting, prepared exactly to his specifications. But tonight, he found himself distracted, his gaze straying too often toward the swinging kitchen doors. He had told himself it was because he disliked incompetence. He didn't admit it was because he wanted to see if she would return. And she did. Naomi Carter emerged with a tray balanced on one hand, gliding between tables with measured steps. Her expression was composed. Her shoulders squared, her eyes alert without being wary. She wore the uniform like armor, but her jaw had no tension. She walked with the assurance of someone who had made peace with her own worth, long before she entered this gilded room. When she arrived at Table 7, she greeted him as though he were any other customer. "Good evening, Mr. Cross. It's nice to see you again. Would you like your usual tonight?" Ethan looked up, studying her face for hesitation. There was none. I want something different. Naomi poised her pen. Of course. What would you prefer? The words had barely left her lips before he began, his voice calm but precise, each instruction like a blade sharpened to a fine edge. Steak medium rare. Exactly. Medium rare. Sauce on the side. The asparagus must be firm, not limp, and steamed for 4 minutes. The potato should be baked. Skin crisp, flesh soft, and served separately with butter and sour cream. The wine, Cabernet Sauvignon, 2018, was unopened at the table with a temperature of 65 degrees. He paused, letting the details hang in the air like weights. Then he leaned back. Do you think you can manage that? Other servers might have wilted under the scrutiny, fumbling for reassurance or tripping over apologies. Naomi repeated the order word for word, her tone clear and professional, as though he had asked nothing extraordinary. Yes, she said when she finished. I'll make sure everything is prepared just as you like. She didn't break eye contact. She didn't shrink. She stood there, steady as a stone in a river, letting his current wash over her without moving her an inch. Something inside Ethan shifted, though he masked it with the smallest flick of his hand. Fine. Please don't disappoint me. Naomi inclined her head. I won't, she said, then walked away. From the service station, Janet and Carlos watched with open disbelief. He's testing her, Carlos whispered. That's how it starts. Every single one of us has been through it. He piles on the rules, and if you stumble once you're finished. She didn't even flinch. Janet murmured, almost admiring. She will. Carlos crossed his arms. Everyone does. But Naomi, retrieving the wine from storage, wasn't rattled. She had learned long ago that people who controlled every detail did so because they feared losing control of themselves. She remembered her grandmother's words. Some people bark because they're scared. Don't take the bark personally. Look at the person holding it in their throat. When she returned with the bottle, she presented it the way she'd been trained, label, facing forward, voice, pleasant but firm. Cabernet Sauvignon, 2018. Would you like to inspect it? Ethan studied her face longer than the bottle. Finally he nodded, and she uncorked it with a smooth, practiced twist. The wine slid into the glass in a perfect stream. She placed it gently in front of him and stepped back. He lifted the glass, sniffed, tasted. She saw the calculation flicker in his eye for a heartbeat. Should he find fault? Should he remind her who held the power at this table? The wine is acceptable, he said. Naomi smiled warmly, as though he had given her the highest praise. I'm glad to hear it. I'll check on your entree. Then she left, not lingering for approval. Ethan set his glass down, unsettled. He had meant the words to sting, to assert superiority. Instead, she disarmed them and turned acceptable into a compliment without challenging him. He found himself thinking about her as she walked away, her calm poise, her unflappable professionalism. Most people tried to impress him. She seemed more interested in simply doing her job well. The kitchen was alive with its usual symphony, pans hissing knives, chopping chefs barking times and temperatures. Naomi relayed Ethan's order, precisely repeating every detail to Carlos and double-checking the steak's temperature with the chef. She didn't embellish. She didn't sigh. She treated Ethan's demands as usual. Why aren't you rattled? Carlos asked, narrowing his eyes. That man's impossible. Naomi shrugged. He knows what he wants. That's not impossible. Carlos shook his head. No, it's more than that. He likes breaking people. Watch yourself. But Naomi only smiled faintly. If someone tries to break me, that's about them, not me. When she returned to the floor with his dinner, the air seemed heavier around table 7. Diners at nearby tables glanced over curiously as if waiting for the next scene in a play. Ethan inspected each dish like a jeweler studying diamonds. He cut into the steak, examined the color, tasted, sampled the asparagus, and then the potato. Naomi stood calmly at his side, waiting. At last he set his knife down. "It's acceptable." "Wonderful," Naomi replied, as though he'd said perfect. "Please let me know if there's anything else I can do for you." She turned to go, and Ethan found himself watching her longer than he meant to, for reasons he didn't understand. He had been ready to dismiss and catalog her as another server soon to crumble. Instead, he felt the first twinge of curiosity. It unsettled him more than disappointment ever had. As Naomi clocked out that night, Janet caught her by the lockers. "How'd you survive him?" "Most people cry after their first round." Naomi pulled her hair free from its bun and shrugged. "He's just a man ordering dinner." Janet stared, then shook her head. "No, he's not. He's Ethan Cross." Naomi smiled softly. "Maybe. But even Ethan Cross still has to eat." She didn't say it out loud, but she thought it as she walked into the crisp night air. She wasn't here to fear him. She was here to do her job, to save for her future. If Ethan wanted to test her, let him. More complicated things than a man with money and an attitude had tested her. And somewhere in the corner of Lumière, Ethan lingered longer than usual, after paying his bills, staring at the wine glass still half full. He wasn't thinking about mergers or profits for the first time in months. He was thinking about the new girl with steady hands and a calm voice who refused to be shaken. A rumor had taken root in the dining room. By next week, the new girl could handle table 7. It passed from host stand to dish pit, like contraband, half hope, half disbelief, until even Pierre began to breathe between courses. Only Ethan refused to participate. He arrived on schedule, meticulous as a metronome, and decided to push. On Tuesday, he began with temperature and timing, not of meat or wine, but of everything else. The bread should be warm, not hot. The butter should be pliable, not melting. Sparkling water, no ice, a lemon near the rim, but never touching it. Plates were heated, but not enough to affect the steak's final temperature. He relayed each preference in a tone without apology, and inviting none. Naomi took notes, repeated the list without a stumble, and added one question that wasn't a challenge, but a calibration. "Would you like all of that staged at once?" she asked, "or sequenced, so nothing waits and cools?" "Sequenced," he said, taken off guard by the competence tucked inside the question. "Of course," she replied, and disappeared into the service ballet. He watched her conduct it. She adjusted the runner's tray so the bread arrived when the wine did, asked the line to hold the plates in the warmer, and touched the butter dish with the back of her knuckle before setting it down, a quiet expert test. When she returned, everything was exactly as requested. Ethan tasted, searching for fault, and found none. He granted only a brief nod. Friday he escalated again. "I need precision," he said as she approached. "The wine should be opened and allowed to breathe for 20 minutes. Not 19, not 21. Naomi's smile was professional, not amused. "I'll set a timer where you can see it. Would you like me to pour at the start or the end?" "The end," he answered, already preparing to dislike the result. "Noted," she said, placing a small silver timer on the corner of his table, before excusing herself to the next station. Pierre watched from the host stand, fingers laced tight. "She's timing this man's wine in front of him," he whispered. Janet smirked. "She's timing his anxiety." "That's different." The timer ticked. Ethan pretended not to look at it and looked anyway. He had long ago taught himself to distrust other people's clocks, other people's promises, estimates, margins for error. The small, steady click made a sound he recognized from both boardrooms and childhood. The measurable passage of a resource you can never return. The bell chimed. Naomi arrived exactly on cue, poured precisely, and waited. He lifted the glass, already composing a critique. The wine was annoyingly excellent. He swallowed disappointment and said, "Acceptable." "I'm glad," she answered. "Your entree will follow in 3 minutes." "2," he said without thinking. She inclined her head. "2." In the kitchen, Carlos glanced at the tickets. 2 minutes, she says to him. Naomi met his grimace with a calm one of her own. 1:45 would be even better. She returned in 1:48, setting the plate, as the second hand kissed the mark. Ethan raised an eyebrow. The smallest confession, that precision too could impress him. Then hid it behind the inspection ritual. Between courses, Naomi showed up in less visible ways. At table 12, she knelt to the level of an elderly guest to explain the menu without condescension. At 5, she brought a second candle without being asked, because she'd noticed a woman shielding her eyes from a draft. At 8, she refilled a child's water and folded a paper crane from the paper coaster. The child grinned, and the parents relaxed. Ethan noticed. He told himself he watched because he despised inefficiency. He said he studied her because every system had a weak point and needed to find it. The truth kept bleeding through those excuses like light around a blackout shade. "Why do you do that?" he asked when she returned to his table after easing a tense conversation at 4, with a joke so gentle the guests didn't feel threatened. "Do what sir anticipate. It's easier to prevent a problem than fix one," she said. Same with people as with plates. He almost said something cynical, then stopped. She wasn't performing for him, and he lacked the vocabulary to dismiss the fact that he liked that. The following Tuesday, he tried another angle. "Tonight," he said as she greeted him, "I'd like to adjust the service order. Bring the salad at the end. I want the entree first." "Of course," Naomi said. "Would you like the kitchen to hold the greens so they don't wilt?" "Yes." "And the dressing on the side?" He didn't answer immediately. He never asked for advice. Yet he heard himself say, "What do you recommend for a late-course salad vinaigrette? It wakes the palate rather than coating it." "Fine," he said, and felt the word land strangely in his mouth, closer to trust than he meant it to be. After the rush, Janet passed Naomi a paper cup of water in the break room and leaned against the lockers. "You're rewiring him," she said. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." Naomi laughed softly. "I'm not rewiring anyone. I'm just doing my job." Janet said that people have been doing their jobs around him for years. "What you're doing is different." Naomi shrugged, more modest than uncertain. He may be different when someone treats him like he might be. Naomi sat at the small table by the lone window that night in her studio apartment. She spread out what mattered: a half-completed admissions essay, a printed checklist of immunizations, and a budget she updated with a pencil, because erasing the numbers felt like taking control of them. A voicemail blinked from the coffee shop manager asking if she could take an extra shift. She stared at the phone, thought about rent and sleep, and texted back, "Can't this week. Sorry." Then she wrote a paragraph about why she wanted to be a nurse that didn't sound like she was trying to impress a stranger. It sounded like her grandmother. It sounded like the truth. At Lumière, Ethan closed out his bill and paused over the tip line. Habit wanted a familiar number that said he had met expectations exactly and owed nothing more. His pen hesitated. He added another 5 points, then, annoyed at himself, scratched it out and returned to 15. It wasn't parsimony. It was superstition. Never show the world where it can pull you. He slid the check folio toward the table's edge and left without waiting for Pierre's practiced farewell. On Friday, the restaurant filled early. A corporate table ordered 3 courses as if they were a dare. A couple announced an engagement at the bar with cheers that somehow stayed polite. Naomi kept her section moving like a river that never overflowed its banks. Ethan watched the orchestration, and raised the bar. He said the asparagus should be trimmed to a uniform length when she arrived. 3 inches. Naomi wrote it down as if he'd requested more pepper. Certainly. And the steak, he added, should rest exactly long enough to hold its juices, but not long enough to cool. She met his gaze evenly. The chef and I will coordinate the pass so it moves when ready. Will you check it yourself? Yes, she answered, and meant it. He expected the edge of sarcasm that always sharpened this exchange with others. There was none. He tried again. If it arrives even slightly off. You'll tell me, she said gently, cutting off the threat with an assumption of collaboration rather than combat. And I'll fix it. He held her eyes for a beat longer than he should have. The old script had no line for a server who refused to audition for fear. You are very sure of yourself, he said. I'm sure of my job, she replied. And I'm sure of your preferences. That makes the work clearer, not harder. When the entree landed, he went hunting for a flaw. The plate was warm but not scorching. The resting had been timed so well that the first cut released a breath of steam and nothing more. The asparagus lay in a neat row as uniform as a row of soldiers, yet not rigid, still alive with color. He tasted. It was maddeningly what he wanted. The silence stretched enough that Naomi broke it, but not with apology. If there's anything you'd like adjusted, she said, I'll do it. If not, I'll give you a few minutes to enjoy. Ethan set down his fork. Why are you not frustrated with me? Naomi tilted her head, considering him as carefully as he considered wine. I don't see a reason to be. Most people do. Most people hear demands. I hear instructions. If they're clear, I can meet them. And if they're not, I can ask better questions. Something like offense flickered, and then unexpectedly relief. He had built a life on being impossible to satisfy, so that no one could say they had satisfied and deserved something from him. She offered no angle, only a standard she intended to meet. He didn't say thank you. He wasn't built that way yet. But when she left, he found he was listening for her footsteps, even as the quartet changed songs, and the room returned to its controlled glow. Later, as she wiped the last clean edge of her station, Naomi caught her reflection in the brass of the espresso machine, a little tired, a little proud. She had walked a tightrope all night with no net. The trick she knew wasn't balance for balance's sake. It was knowing where to look. Not down, not back. Forward where the next step waited. Ethan opened a contract across the city in a corner office and saw only white space where words should be. The day had been a cascade of decisive statements. He had been both feared and obeyed. It should have felt like victory. Instead, a question he had never asked anyone repeated, unwelcome and persistent. What exactly am I testing for? He closed the laptop and turned off the light. The room did not answer. On the schedule, Tuesday waited. On the river lights stitched a calm seam through the dark. And between them, invisible but undeniable, a taut line stretched from table 7 to the small locker where Naomi hung her apron at the end of every night, a line named tension interest, or the quiet beginning of change. The morning began with steam and clatter, and the burr of a grinder that always sounded a little like a helicopter coming in too low. Naomi worked the espresso bar with the rhythm of a drummer dose tamp twist pull, milk hissing cups warming orders called over the small talk of regulars who didn't know her last name and didn't need to. A man in a suit snapped his fingers for oat milk. A student apologized for dropping coins. A mother steadied a stroller with one shoe while fishing for a loyalty card. By noon, the smell of coffee had woven into her sweater. By 1, she had wiped the counter so many times, the wood felt like a memory. After the shift, she cut across 2 bus lines to get to the office building, where she cleaned 3 floors. Fluorescents hummed. Cubicles stood like quiet confessionals. She emptied bins, lined them with crisp plastic and folded paper triangles on the bathroom towels because care lived in small corners where most people never looked. Her phone buzzed with a text from the restaurant. "We're heavy on reservations. Can you come in a little early?" She typed, "On my way," and swallowed the ache in her calves. By the time Naomi reached Lumière, the sky over the river had turned a soft, exhausted blue. Pierre looked relieved enough to hug her, thought better of it, and handed her a fresh apron instead. "Table 7 is already seated," he said, voice pitched low. "He asked for you." "Of course he did," Janet muttered in an aside that tried to be humorous and landed closer to worry. "You good, honey?" "Good," Naomi answered, and meant it enough to make it accurate. Ethan sat with his phone face down, as if it were a stubborn dog he was training. The dining room drew its familiar geometry around him. The right angles of linen, the gentle glass ellipse, and the fixed point of his routine. But his attention had already shifted. When Naomi stepped into the corner of his vision, a thought stronger than habit took the lead watch. "Good evening, Mr. Cross," she said, setting water and a menu he didn't need. "Would you like your usual or something different?" He almost said, different as a test, the way a chess player moves a knight to draw a mistake. But he noticed, really noticed the dullness under her eyes and the way she rolled her right shoulder once, like a dancer working out a knot. "The usual," he said, surprising himself with the mercy of it. She wrote nothing down, but he had learned not to be fooled by that. Right away. He watched her cross to the kitchen. Her steps measured, not dragging. She checked the warmer with the back of her hand, adjusted a runner's tray, and lifted a stray napkin from the corner of a table with the inexplicable care she gave to everything. When she returned with his wine, she presented the bottle and waited. He searched for the tiny tells, the tremor the breath held too long, that signaled fear. None arrived. He lifted the glass, tasted, and glanced up. "Acceptable," he said. "I'm glad," she answered, unoffended by understatement. "Your entree is timed with the pass." He didn't mean to say it. "Have you eaten today?" Her smile flinched almost imperceptibly, then reset. "Yes." "What did you eat?" The question sounded too intimate on his tongue. It wasn't the kind he asked. He hardly asked questions at all, unless he already knew the answer. "A granola bar." "A beet." "2 if we're counting." "That's not a meal. It's fuel." She tucked the wine key back into her apron, as if that settled it. He could have left it alone. He did not. "How many jobs do you have?" She looked at him then, not suspicious so much as measuring the size of the space he'd opened between them. Enough to manage. Not an evasion exactly, a boundary. The room moved around them, conversations rising and falling, silver chiming, softly the quartet turning a corner into something minor and sweet. Ethan felt the familiar urge to slot this exchange into a system, identify leverage, exploit it, control the outcome. The reflex found nothing to grip. She wasn't angling. She wasn't auditioning for anything he could grant. "Is there a reason you're asking?" Naomi said, gentler than the question deserved. He considered a dozen answers and chose none of them. "Curiosity," he said finally, which was inadequate, and the first honest thing he'd offered her that wasn't a critique. "Then, here's a true thing," she said. "I'm saving for school. Nights here make the numbers move faster." She lifted the corner of a smile. That's the simple math of it. He wanted to ask, "What kind of school is it?" He tried to say the word out loud and watch her face change. He didn't. The entree arrived, and Naomi's attention shifted to service the way a musician tunes to the following key. She set the plate, checked the angle, like a cartographer, making sure north meant north, and stepped back. He cut into the steak, found nothing to punish, and let the quiet that followed hold something new. the sense that this table had become a place where he might not have to win to be safe. At the service station, Janet poured water into a row of glasses like a ceremony and shot Naomi a look. "You're swaying a little." "I'm standing still." "Your bones are swaying," Janet said. "If he gives you trouble tonight, I'll take the table." Naomi shook her head. "I've got him." "You don't have to prove anything." "I'm not. I'm working." She said it without heat, a simple sentence that covered an empire of effort. Carlos leaned on the pass. "He's watching you differently," he said, eyes narrowing toward the corner table. "Less shark, more, I don't know, birdwatcher." "Thanks," Naomi said, uncertain if she'd been complimented or warned. "Don't feed him from your hand," Carlos added, mock serious. "He might be tame, but the beak still snaps." Naomi laughed, a slight sound that shook off the weight inside her shoulders. "It'll be fine." Back at table 7, Ethan waited for the check-in he used to resent. Naomi arrived without hovering and asked, "How does everything look?" "Fine," he said, reflex running ahead of thought. She glanced at the steak at the glass at him. "And how do you look?" His mouth almost twisted into a smile like a man eating dinner. "Then we're both succeeding," she said lightly. And for the first time, he felt it land not as patter, but as an offer. "We can do this without hurting each other." He touched the stem of his glass. "What are you studying, when the numbers make sense?" "Healthcare," she said, as if the word were a room she preferred to enter slowly. "I want to be where people are frightened, and make them less so." He held her gaze for a long breath. "That's work." "It is." Her voice softened. "My grandmother used to say fear makes people smaller unless someone stands beside them." Then it speaks more softly. He looked down suddenly and irrationally afraid she'd notice how the sentence had entered him. The sensation was oddly physical, like cold air tasting of oranges at the door of a childhood bakery, or the weight of a hand once placed on his shoulder before a room full of adults. He set his knife and fork together, a signal he rarely sent so early. "You quote her often," he said. "She earned it." Naomi's smile took on quiet edges, the kind that know grief. "She raised me, taught me to stand without stepping on anyone." "No more questions," he told himself, and then asked another. "Is it working?" "Mostly." She lifted a corner of humor. "Sometimes standing looks a lot like swaying." He surprised himself by wanting to steady her. She said, "Let me know if you need anything else." Returning to the choreography that had become second nature, table 12 needed a menu explained with care. 4 needed a slower check to prolong a conversation that looked like repair. 5 needed a candle relit. She tended small flames and called it work. Ethan watched her share attention as if it were an inexhaustible resource. He should have looked away. He didn't. He should have rehearsed his next complaint. He found he had none. When the bill came, his pen hovered again over the tip line, that narrow field where reflex and intention wrestled. The old number wrote itself. He added another digit. He drew a slash through it. He set it back. He closed the folio before he could change it again. Pierre opened the check at the host's stand, blinked, and then deliberately said nothing. Gratitude was a fragile ecosystem. Announce it too loudly, and you change the weather. Naomi changed shoes at her locker and sat for a minute longer than usual. She texted the coffee shop manager, "I can't open tomorrow. I need sleep." She expected the guilt to arrive ready and loud. It didn't. In its place was a steadier kind of voice, one that sounded like her own. "Stand. Don't vanish." In the alley, the night smelled of rain that hadn't started yet. She lifted her face to the wind and let it cool the places where worry kept trying to set up a tent. Across town, Ethan paused at a window he often passed without seeing. The city lay out below, like a circuit board, humming and indifferent. He thought about schedules calibrated to the minute, about timers you could trust, and people you couldn't, about a server who had asked him what he looked like and seemed prepared to believe the answer. He thought about hunger as a word, as a fact, as a thing that could be eased by something as simple as noticing. A truth he would not yet say aloud. Found purchase power had never made him feel large. It had only allowed him to make rooms small enough to fit inside without being touched. Tonight, for the first time in longer than he could remember, he wondered what it might feel like to stop shrinking the room. The first drops tapped the glass. Somewhere over the river, a seam in the sky gave way. The storm would come tomorrow, or the next day, and with it, there would be some new test of who he was, when control wasn't the only instrument in his hand. He turned off the light and let the dark be big. By late September, the weather had turned restless. Chicago's riverfront swelled with a metallic gray that mirrored the sky, and the wind pushed hard enough against the windows of Lumière that the glass trembled when gusts came too suddenly. That Friday evening, the dining room filled faster than usual, people fleeing the storm outside for warmth, candlelight, and the illusion that money could purchase shelter from everything. Naomi arrived soaked through to the lining of her coat. Her umbrella had folded backward 2 blocks from the bus stop, and by the time she'd run the last stretch, rain had slicked her hair and plastered her sleeves to her arms. She squeezed water from her cuffs in the break room and tried to coax her reflection into something polished enough to step onto the floor. "Girl, you look like you swam here," Janet said, handing her a stack of paper towels. "I almost did," Naomi replied with a small laugh. The bus was late. I wasn't going to miss the shift. Pierre appeared in the doorway, his face tight with the expression of a man already behind schedule. "Naomi." "He's here," he said quietly, "and he asked for you." Of course he had. Table 7 was no longer assigned. It was claimed. Naomi replaced her apron with a dry one, smoothed it over her damp uniform, and squared her shoulders before stepping back into the glow of the dining room. Ethan sat by the windows, his usual fortress of distance surrounding him. Yet when he saw her approaching, something in his expression shifted. His eyes scanned the droplets clinging to the edges of her hair, the way her shoulders shivered faintly, the pale determination behind her practiced smile. "You're wet," he observed. "It's just rain," she said, setting down water and a menu she knew he wouldn't use. "I'm sorry to keep you waiting. The storms made everything run behind tonight." Ethan studied her more closely than he meant to. The professional mask was there but thin. He could see fatigue in how she carried her tray, the trace of cold in her hands. For reasons he couldn't fully name, it unsettled him more than any mistake. "Have you eaten today?" he asked. Naomi blinked at him, caught off guard. "I'm fine, thank you." That wasn't the question. She hesitated, then answered honestly. "A granola bar around noon." "That isn't a meal, it's fuel. You can't serve properly if you're exhausted and starving." He lifted a hand, and Pierre, watching from the bar, hurried over like a summoned soldier. "She's going to order something from the kitchen," Ethan said, his tone carrying the authority of command, but with an edge Naomi hadn't heard before, something almost protective. "Please, put it on my bill. Make sure she eats it properly before she returns." Naomi straightened. "Mr. Cross, I can't eat during my shift." "Pierre works for me more than you," Ethan replied smoothly. "And I'm telling him to see that you're fed." Pierre glanced at Naomi, eyes wide with disbelief, then nodded. "Of course, sir." Naomi's protest faltered. She was too tired to argue, too cold to laugh at the absurdity. She settled on a compromise. "Soup and salad. Something quick." "No," Ethan said firmly. "Order real food." She looked at him for a long moment, surprised at the heat in his insistence. Finally, she gave a slight nod. The chicken with rice, then. Thank you. Ethan waved her gratitude away, as though kindness were his regular currency, though both knew it wasn't. In the kitchen, the staff stared when Naomi handed in her own ticket. Wait, Carlos said, blinking at the slip. You're eating at work, Mr. Cross insisted. Janet nearly dropped a tray. The terror of table 7 bought you dinner. Naomi shook her head, a little embarrassed. He just noticed I was hungry. Carlos smirked. That man doesn't notice anything about his servers except their mistakes. This is not normal. The line cooks prepared the dish with unusual care, adding a little extra seasoning and a sprig of parsley, as though the food was carrying a message. Take this as proof that miracles sometimes happen. When Naomi returned to the dining room with her plate, Ethan waited patiently, scrolling through his phone, but glancing up every few seconds to check whether she'd started eating. She sat briefly at the staff station, ate quickly, but gratefully, and felt warmth spread through her limbs that had nothing to do with the soup's steam. When she approached his table again, she said softly, "Thank you. That was very kind." Ethan only nodded, his expression unreadable. But something had cracked in the armor he wore so well. He picked up the menu that night with an uncharacteristic pause. I want something different. Naomi raised her brows. Different. He said, You've been watching me eat the same thing for weeks, folding the menu closed. Surprise me. The words landed like a foreign language in her ears. For the first time since she'd started at Lumière, he wasn't dictating the experience down to the last detail. He was asking her to choose. Are you sure? She asked carefully. You're usually very particular. I'm sure. But one condition. When you choose, explain why. Her lips curved into a small smile. All right. You should try the lamb with rosemary and garlic. It's bold like your preferred dishes, but the herbs will give you something new. Instead of the potato, the wild rice pilaf is more complex and a little more surprising. And for wine, the 2019 Bordeaux. Strong enough to suit your taste, but deeper than your usual Cabernet. He listened without interrupting his gaze, steady, his expression difficult to read. At last he nodded. Order it. When the dish arrived, he cut into the lamb with his usual precision, tasted it, and for the first time in months, felt not just satisfaction, but something more startling, pleasant surprise. This is excellent, he admitted, voice low. Naomi's smile widened. I'm glad. Throughout the evening, Ethan was distracted from his usual world of emails and stock prices. He caught himself watching Naomi as she moved through the restaurant, still a little tired, still working too hard, but lighting each table with a calm attentiveness that had nothing to do with him. She refilled glasses before anyone asked, explained the difference between 2 sauces to a confused diner, and chuckled when a child spilled water, making the accident seem less like a disaster and more like clumsy grace. He realized with something that felt like disorientation that her kindness wasn't a performance. It wasn't for him. It was her way of moving through the world. And he who had taught himself that every smile was currency, every gesture leverage, wondered what it meant to be kind without an agenda. He looked at her differently when she returned to his table near the night's end. You chose well, he said. Thank you, Naomi replied. But it wasn't difficult. You've shown me what you like even when you weren't trying to. He almost smiled. Almost. By the time he left Lumière that evening, the storm outside had softened into drizzle. Ethan paused at the door, glancing again toward the dining room, where Naomi was clearing glasses at another table. For the first time in years, he left with the sense that he had been taken care of, not in the sense of service purchased, but in the rarer sense of someone wanting his experience to be good because it mattered to her. He rested his hands on the wheel in his car and sat longer than necessary before starting the engine. He had spent a lifetime believing vulnerability was weakness. Tonight, he had been vulnerable without meaning to be. And instead of crumbling the world, shifted slightly towards something better. For Naomi, that night ended with her shoes drying by a radiator, and her mind turning over the unexpected softness she'd seen in a man who was supposed to be impossible. She thought about the way he'd ordered food for her, the way he had trusted her judgment for the first time. She thought against her better judgment that maybe storms didn't only bring ruin. Sometimes they cleared the air. Saturday evening found Ethan in a place he rarely ventured his uncertainty. He sat at the edge of his bed with a phone in his hand, staring at Naomi's number on the screen. It wasn't written in his contacts under server or restaurant. He had asked Pierre for it under the pretense of confirming scheduling details for his favorite table, and Pierre, half grateful and half terrified, had complied without question. Ethan told himself he was gathering information. He knew it was more than that. He typed a message, deleted it, tried again. Dinner tomorrow. Somewhere other than Lumière. The cursor blinked back at him like a dare. He pressed send before he could retreat behind habit. Naomi read the message after her morning shift at the cafe, her hair pulled into a loose knot, and her apron still dusted with ground coffee. She leaned against the counter, heart skipping once in surprise, then again in doubt. She knew the rules servers and guests belonged to separate worlds, yet she remembered the stormy night, the meal he had trusted her to choose, and the moment he had ordered food for her, as if her well-being mattered. Against her caution, she typed back, yes. Where? They met the following evening at a small Italian place, tucked into a quiet stretch of Little Italy. Ethan had chosen it deliberately. No chandeliers, no wall of glass overlooking the river, no audience of diners expecting to see him at table 7. Just wooden chairs, the smell of garlic and tomato, and checkered tablecloths that carried the comfort of imperfection. When Naomi walked in, the hostess guided her to a corner table where Ethan was already seated. He stood when he saw her, his posture less rigid than usual, though his hands betrayed a flicker of nervous energy. "You look different here," Naomi said with a faint smile as she sat across from him. "Different. More relaxed. It's less like you're waiting for the world to mess up." He almost argued, then caught himself. "Maybe the world isn't on trial in this restaurant." "Good," she said, unfolding her napkin. "Then neither am I." Conversation began with small talk. How the rain had finally given way to cool air. How the cafe had been crowded that morning. How the city seemed brighter on Sundays, when fewer people hurried. Ethan found himself struggling. For 20 years he had spoken fluently about mergers, contracts, risk margins, and dividends. Now faced with Naomi's open expression, he realized he didn't know how to talk about himself. "I have to confess something," he said finally. Naomi tilted her head. "All right. I don't know how to do this. Dinner. Without an agenda." Her laugh was soft but kind. "You've been doing it at Lumière for weeks. That was different. There I'm the client. Here." He gestured vaguely, words falling short. "Here you're just Ethan," she said. The sound of his name in her voice disarmed him more than he wanted to admit. Their meals arrived, simple pasta for her, veal for him. Naomi took a bite and sighed with quiet appreciation. Ethan tasted his and found it imperfect, yet somehow better for being so. "Tell me something that made you happy this week," she said suddenly. He paused, surprised by the question. Happy. Yes. Not satisfied. Not successful. Happy. He searched through the week's ledger in his mind, scanning appointments and calls, dinners and emails, all weighed against the word. At last, he said, "Thinking about tonight. What would it be like?" Naomi's smile widened. "That's sweet." "And you?" he asked, almost bracing. "I got to quit my weekend cleaning job," she said with a laugh. Thanks to you, I can manage on just 2 now. I even had time to read a book yesterday. Ethan leaned in slightly. What book? Does it matter, she teased. It was just lovely to read for no reason other than wanting to. He nodded slowly, realizing he could not remember the last time he had done anything simply because he wanted to. By dessert, the conversation had shifted to deeper currents. Naomi asked gently, "Why were you so harsh with all those servers before me?" Ethan lowered his fork, considering the truth. "I was testing them, to see how much they would tolerate and how far I could push before they broke. When they did, it confirmed what I already believed about people, that everyone has a breaking point, and it's safer not to trust them." "And what did you learn from me?" He met her gaze, feeling more exposed than he had in years. "That's not everyone who breaks. That some people answer difficulty with kindness instead of fear. That maybe trust isn't always a trap." Naomi reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. "That makes you hopeful." Terrified, he admitted with a faint laugh. "But also, yes, hopeful." They walked back to his car, under the soft glow of street lamps, the night cool, but no longer stormy. Ethan moved more slowly than usual, as though reluctant to let the evening end. "I need to tell you something else," he said when they reached the curb. Naomi looked up, waiting. "I'm falling in love with you. I know it's fast and very easy, but I can't stop thinking about you. You've changed the way I see everything." Her expression softened into joy. "I'm falling in love with you too, Ethan. I have been since that night you ordered food for me. That was the first time I saw past the armor, and I liked what I saw." Relief swept through him, stronger than any victory in business. "Really? Really," she confirmed, stepping closer. "You're not the man you pretend to be in that restaurant. You're kinder than you want anyone to believe." Ethan cupped her face, awed by the trust in her eyes, and kissed her beneath the lights of Little Italy. The world around them blurred into silence. For the first time in decades, he wasn't defending himself against anyone. He was present with her. That night, Naomi returned to her apartment with damp hair from the river breeze and a smile she couldn't hide. For once, she wasn't calculating hours and paychecks or rehearsing how to stretch her savings. She was thinking about how it felt to be looked at not as a server, not as a burden, but as someone worth knowing. Ethan drove home with his hands loose on the wheel, the city lights streaking like threads across the windshield. He had spent a lifetime controlling every variable to prevent disappointment. Tonight, he had relinquished control, and found not chaos, but peace. He wondered if that was what people meant when they spoke of happiness. Neither of them noticed the storm clouds gathering again far above the city. But this time, the coming weather didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a promise that the world, no matter how rough, would keep moving, and that sometimes, against all expectation, storms cleared the sky enough to reveal something worth holding on to. On Tuesday, after their dinner in Little Italy, Ethan arrived at Lumière earlier than usual. He told Pierre he needed time to review contracts before his call with Tokyo. But the truth was more straightforward. He wanted more time to see Naomi. It unsettled him, this sense of anticipation. In business, anticipation was a tool sharpened for advantage. Tonight, it felt closer to nervousness. Naomi greeted him with her usual steady composure. Yet when she leaned forward to set his glass of water, Ethan noticed the faint shadows under her eyes, the tired slump of her shoulders, that professionalism couldn't entirely mask. He surprised himself by saying softly, "You look exhausted." She blinked, caught off guard. "I'm fine." "Ready for your usual?" He didn't answer right away. "Sit down for a moment." Naomi hesitated. "I really shouldn't." "Pierre works for me more than you," Ethan said in the same calm authority he used in boardrooms. "Sit." Against her instincts, she lowered herself onto the chair across from him, folding her hands in her lap, as though she expected to be scolded. I'm not unhappy with your service, Ethan said quickly. You've been more competent than anyone I've ever dealt with here. He paused, then asked, Are you working other jobs besides this? Her mouth curved into something like resignation. I work mornings at a cafe, and weekends cleaning offices. That's not unusual, though. Most people in service work 2 or 3 jobs. Why? She raised her brows. Because one doesn't pay enough to live on Mr. Cross. Restaurant work doesn't come with health insurance or retirement plans. Rent doesn't wait. Ethan felt a sensation stir in his chest, strange and sharp. Guilt, perhaps, though he had long since trained himself to dismiss that word. He had spent years assuming service workers were background to his life present, when needed, invisible when not. He had never considered what their lives looked like after leaving his table. How many hours a week do you work? 70, give or take. But I'm saving for nursing school, so it's worth it. That caught his attention. Nursing school. Her face lit in a way that tiredness couldn't dim. It's always been my dream. My grandmother was a nurse for 40 years. She told me stories about being there for families when they were at their lowest, holding hands, explaining things, making fear feel smaller. I want to do that. Ethan studied her. She looked alive at that moment, more than she had ever carried trays. And how long until you save enough? At this pace, it will take 3 or 4 years. It may take longer if I can't keep up the extra shifts. The weight of her answer settled heavily on him. 3 or 4 years of exhaustion, all to reach a goal that wasn't about wealth or power, but helping strangers. He had never understood ambition that wasn't profit. Now confronted with hers, he didn't know what to say. Naomi glanced toward the kitchen, then stood. I should check on your order. Wait. His voice stopped her. He looked at her carefully, saw the sadness that edged her smile. Your grandmother, would she be proud of you? The softness in Naomi's eyes deepened. She passed away 6 months ago. But yes, she would be proud. She always said caring for people was the most important work you could do. For once, Ethan didn't mask his emotions. I'm sorry, he said quietly. The words felt foreign in his mouth. Thank you. Naomi offered him a genuine smile this time. She would have liked you, actually. She always said grumpy customers usually have the biggest hearts underneath. The sentence hit him like a blade slid between armor. No one had ever suggested he had a heart, let alone a big one. For years he had been treated as a force, not a person. Fear, respect, calculation, but never affection. He felt suddenly exposed, and before he could retreat, Naomi excused herself, leaving him with a meal and his own unsettled thoughts. Later that evening, Ethan barely touched his food. He watched Naomi move through the restaurant, noticing how she treated each guest. She explained menu items to an elderly couple with gentle patience. She congratulated a man at table 12 who nervously proposed to his girlfriend, bringing champagne without being asked. She calmed an irritable diner at table 4 by listening, not apologizing. She wasn't performing. She cared deeply without calculation. Ethan realized he was witnessing something he couldn't remember ever seeing in his own world. Someone working not for advantage, but because kindness was simply who they were. When she returned to check on him, he asked abruptly, Naomi, do you think I'm a terrible person? The question startled her. Why would you ask that? Because I've made 3 servers quit in the past month. Because I'm demanding impossible to please, and everyone here fears me. Naomi studied him for a long moment. You have high standards. You've been disappointed so often that you expect the worst. And you test people to see if they care enough to meet those standards. That doesn't make you terrible. His throat tightened, though he kept his face still. And what else? You're lonelier than you let anyone see. And sometimes you're harder on people than necessary, because being alone feels safer than being let down. Her words landed like a blow. She had seen through decades of walls as though they were glass. He had spent years becoming sharp enough to keep people away, but she had walked straight into the truth of him without hesitation. He looked down. "Why don't you quit like the others?" Naomi's smile was gentle, no longer professional. "Because underneath all that gruffness, you're actually good. My grandmother taught me that good people deserve patience and kindness, even when they don't know how to ask for it." Something cracked inside him then, something he had thought indestructible. He lowered his voice. "I don't know how to be different. You don't have to become someone else," Naomi said. "You have to remember the people serving you are human beings trying their best. Most want to make you happy. You have to give them a chance." Ethan sat silently, her words circling in his mind like echoes in a cavern. Someone had shown him his flaws without condemnation for the first time in years. She had pointed to his sharp edges and called him redeemable. She said softly that your food is getting cold, breaking the moment before it became too heavy. He looked down at the plate untouched, then back at her. "Will you stay while I eat?" "Just for a few minutes," she said, glancing around. She sat across from him, not as server and client, but as two people sharing a table. Ethan wasn't eating alone for the first time in a very long time. Later, as he drove home, the city lights blurred into streaks of color across his windshield. He thought about walls he had built a grandmother who had loved him once, and the possibility that love wasn't weakness, but strength. And in a modest apartment across town, Naomi hung her apron, sat on her bed, and allowed herself to feel hopeful for the first time in months. The cracks in Ethan's armor had been small but real, and sometimes she knew it only took one crack for the light to begin seeping through. The following 2 weeks unfolded differently than anyone at Lumière could have imagined. By now, it was no secret that Table 7 belonged to Naomi. The staff whispered about it in the kitchen, but their voices held less pity and more awe. Ethan's reputation as the terror of the dining room was shifting, reshaped slowly by something no one had expected. Patience offered where none had been earned. On Tuesday, when Ethan arrived, he didn't bark orders immediately. Instead, he asked Naomi how her morning shift at the cafe had gone. The question, simple as it was, startled half the staff within earshot. He didn't even look at the watch, which he always set on the table like a weapon. That night, he tipped 20% without scratching it out 3 times first. On Friday, he greeted her not with criticism, but with, "What do you recommend tonight?" She blinked, then suggested roasted duck with a Pinot Noir. He accepted it without modification, surprising both of them. When the dish arrived, he ate silently, not hunting for fault, but savoring something he hadn't allowed himself in years: trust another person's judgment. Naomi noticed the changes, but didn't remark on them. She treated him as she always had: professional, calm, respectful, steady. Yet inside, she felt the quiet shift. Something was healing, not just in him, but in herself. Every time he softened, it reminded her that her grandmother's lessons hadn't been wasted. Patience could build bridges where fear had burned them down. Still, Ethan wasn't free of old reflexes. He demanded that the wine be decanted in exactly 20 minutes on a Friday. Not 19. Not 21. His words were sharp, the tone of the man who once reduced servers to tears. Naomi nodded calmly. Absolutely. Why is that precise number needed? Is it for flavor, or because you're testing consistency? Her question cut through his armor. He blinked, caught off guard, then admitted, control. Naomi tilted her head, her voice gentle. What if you trusted the wine to be good without the stopwatch? The silence stretched. He looked at the timer in his hand, and then at her. Slowly, he set it down. Pour when you think it's ready. She smiled, genuine and warm, gladly. When the wine touched his lips, it was excellent. But what lingered was not the taste. It was the fact that for once, he hadn't controlled every detail and nothing had fallen apart. Naomi's co-workers noticed his changes more than she did. Janet whispered one evening. He said please when he asked for more water. Carlos shook his head. That man doesn't say please. Next, you'll tell me he smiles. He did, Janet said. And it didn't look like it hurt. The restaurant, once tense whenever Ethan entered, seemed to breathe easier. New servers stopped asking to avoid table 7. Regulars whispered about the billionaire who no longer terrorized staff. Naomi became the quiet answer to no one dared ask. Could he change? Ethan, for his part, found himself thinking about Naomi long after leaving Lumière. During conference calls, his mind drifted to how she carried herself with unshakable dignity. At board meetings, he caught himself hearing her voice. Stand tall. Don't let fear shrink you. He began to see his colleagues differently too. Instead of issuing cold commands, he asked questions he had never cared to ask before. How's your family? What do you need to succeed? At first, his team looked stunned, then grateful. Slowly, a new kind of respect emerged, not built on fear, but trust. But the change that mattered most was not in the office. It was in him. For the first time in decades, he felt curiosity about another human being, genuine curiosity unlinked from profit or control. One evening he asked Naomi directly, "How much longer until you can start nursing school?" She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. 3 or 4 years if everything goes right. That's too long. Her eyes flicked up. It's what I can manage. He studied her silent for a moment. Then he reached into his briefcase and slid an envelope across the table. This will cover your tuition and your living expenses. I want you to quit the extra jobs and start now. Naomi froze, staring at the envelope as though it were dangerous. Mr. Cross, I can't accept this. It's nothing to me, he said firmly. But to you, it means freedom. You shouldn't spend the best years of your life exhausting yourself to chase something you could reach tomorrow. She shook her head, her hands trembling slightly. It feels like charity. I don't want charity. It isn't charity, he said, his voice softening. It's an investment. You'll be an incredible nurse. The world needs people like you. Let me help. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. Why would you do this for me? He met her gaze without flinching. Because you've given me something I didn't know I was missing. You reminded me what it feels like to be human. Naomi pressed a hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. She whispered, I don't know what to say. Say yes. Her silence stretched long enough for Ethan to feel his chest tighten. Then finally she nodded. Yes. Thank you. The relief that flooded him was sharper than any business victory he had ever tasted. For the first time, he wasn't closing a deal for profit. He was opening a door for someone else's dream. The restaurant buzzed that night with an energy no one could explain. Naomi moved lighter than she had in months, her steps almost buoyant. Ethan found himself watching her, not with cold scrutiny, but with admiration. She carried hope now, and it shone through her every gesture. When she returned to thank him once more, he stopped her. Naomi, I'd like to see you outside this restaurant again. Not as server and customer, just as we ourselves. Dinner, anywhere you choose. Her smile blossomed into something radiant. I'd like that very much. That night, Ethan walked to his car under a sky freshly cleared of clouds. He didn't need to check his phone watch or reflection in the glass for once. His mind was quiet. His chest was full. And Naomi, back in her apartment, laid the envelope carefully on the table beside her grandmother's photograph. She whispered, I think you'd be proud of me, Grandma. I stood tall, and someone finally saw me. She touched the envelope with reverence, Not for the money inside, but for what it symbolized: trust, belief, and a future no longer chained to exhaustion. The terror of Table 7 was fading. In his place, a man was beginning to emerge, still sharp, exacting, but softened by the courage of someone who had refused to bow to him. And both of them, though they didn't say it aloud, yet knew the truth that hung between them, like a delicate thread. This was no longer just about service and meals. This was about transformation, which began in the smallest acts of kindness and ended in rewriting two lives. 6 months later, Lumière hummed with the energy usually reserved for celebrations. After closing, the entire staff had gathered in the dining room, candles glowing warmly, glasses of champagne bubbling in hand. It wasn't a holiday on the calendar, but it was a milestone in the heart of the restaurant, Naomi's last night before beginning nursing school. She stood by the host's stand, surrounded by co-workers who had once warned her to avoid Table 7 at all costs. Janet hugged her tightly, whispering, "You survived him and turned him human. Now go save the world." Carlos raised his glass and added with mock drama, "From now on, I'll measure asparagus in your honor." Laughter rippled through the room, light and affectionate. At the center of it all stood Ethan, no longer the feared recluse who used Lumière as his personal battlefield. Over the months, he had changed in ways no one thought possible. He said, "Please now." He asked servers about their families. He smiled, not often, but enough that new hires didn't believe the legends of his cruelty. The terror of Table 7 had become something unexpected. A man who could care, and was learning how to show it daily. When Naomi finished her thank yous, Ethan stepped forward, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "I want to say something before she leaves this chapter behind." He reached into his jacket pocket, and the dining room fell into hushed anticipation. He pulled out a small velvet box. Gasps spread across the room. "Naomi," he said, voice carrying across the space where their story had begun. "6 months ago, you stood in front of me at this table and refused to let me tear you down. You saw something in me I couldn't see in myself. You taught me that kindness is stronger than cruelty, that patience is more potent than demands, and that love—" his voice faltered briefly, but he steadied it. "Love is worth the risk I spent my whole life avoiding." Naomi's hands flew to her mouth as tears welled. Ethan dropped to one knee, velvet box open, revealing a ring that caught the candlelight like a star. "You stood up to me when everyone else ran away. You believed in me when I gave you every reason not to. Will you marry me and let me spend the rest of my life proving I can deserve the love you've given me?" "Yes," Naomi whispered, then louder, "Yes, of course." The restaurant erupted into cheers. Janet clapped so hard she nearly spilled her champagne. Carlos whooped. The terror of Table 7 is officially retired. Pierre wiped his eyes discreetly behind a napkin, though no one missed it. Ethan slipped the ring onto Naomi's finger, his hands trembling slightly. When he stood and kissed her, it wasn't the kiss of a man conquering, but of a man finally free. Later, Ethan pulled Naomi aside when the noise had softened into conversation and music. He said one more thing, handing her a sealed envelope. Her brows furrowed. "You've already given me too much." "This one isn't a gift," he assured her. "It's a future." She opened it slowly, then gasped. Inside was a deed to a small clinic in an underserved neighborhood. "A clinic," she whispered. "Our clinic," Ethan corrected gently. "When you finish school, it will be yours to run. I'll provide the resources, but you'll give the heart. I've built empires that only made money. I want to create something that makes a difference with you." Naomi's tears returned, falling freely this time. She threw her arms around his neck, whispering, "I love you, Ethan. All of you. The perfectionist, the dreamer, The man who finally let someone in. "I love you too," he murmured back. More than I ever thought I could. Their story didn't end there. 6 months later, they were married in a ceremony catered by the restaurant where their love had begun. Former servers stood as bridesmaids. Pierre toasted them with misty eyes, declaring, "They proved love can conquer even the sharpest temper." 2 years later, the Washington Cross Free Clinic opened its doors, serving thousands who couldn't afford health care elsewhere. And every Tuesday and Friday, Ethan and Naomi returned to Lumière, not as customer and server, but as husband and wife. They sat at table 7 together, sharing meals, dreams, and the quiet joy of two people who had found their home in each other's hearts. Where once there had been cruelty and fear, there was now laughter and belonging. Where once there was the terror of table 7, there was now only love. Dear reader, if you've journeyed this far, thank you for walking with Ethan and Naomi through storms, battles of pride, and moments of grace. Stories like this remind us that no one is beyond change, and that kindness can transform a life even in small acts. What about you? Have you ever stood your ground against someone impossible? Or have you ever been surprised by kindness where you least expected it? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear them. If you believe in the power of love to transform even the hardest hearts, tap that like button. And if you want more stories of resilience, compassion, and unexpected romance, don't forget to subscribe. There are always more journeys worth taking together. Because sometimes the most beautiful love